Last summer, the Copa America was held in the United States, where the hosts completely embarrassed themselves, both on the pitch and indeed off the pitch. This event, alongside next summer's Club World Cup, which absolutely nobody cares about, are test events for the 2026 World Cup itself, of which the US are the major hosts. It'll be by far the biggest World Cup ever, not only in terms of the number of teams competing and the staggering amount of matches, 104 over just a month and a bit, but also just the sheer geographic area covered. When you also factor in that tickets will likely be ridiculously expensive, thanks Ticketmaster, I'm sure many visiting fans will hope to save money by getting around on public transit instead of driving or rideshare. But of course, the transit in most American cities is anywhere from a bit underwhelming at best to completely dire at worst. I mean, I guess it could be even worse. It could just not exist. So today, 2 years on from the day that the GOAT lifted the most recent title, we'll take a look at all 16 host cities for the 2026 World Cup, including those in Canada and Mexico as well for good measure, and ranking them based on how good I think their transit to the stadium is. What I'm looking for here is both capacity and frequency, though of course the latter can be and often is improved for events. Bonus points if you have a good rail link to the city's main international airport. I include this mainly because there will be tons of fans coming from overseas to see their nations play. Now just a warning, this ranking is subjective, you will disagree with me, that is totally fine, and I did also factor in the vibes around the stadium a little bit in my rankings, so don't think that that won't play a part. But here we go, let's rank the 16 World Cup stadiums for 2026 based on their transit. Number 16, Kansas City Arrowhead Stadium. Or sorry, the GEHA field at Arrowhead Stadium. I guess you have to name the field. I guess the field has to be sponsored separately from the stadium because the stadium is just the stands, right? The stands are sponsored, but the field gets a different sponsor. That doesn't make... Anyway, look, I don't want to be mean to KC. They have a great football culture after all. That is both kinds of football. But 6 World Cup matches here. Save for a downtown streetcar, there's absolutely no urban rail here, especially near the stadium. Just look at this. Just look at it. Enjoy it. Take it in. Number 15, Arlington Dallas AT&T Stadium. At first glance, sure. Dallas does have a decent, if not glamorous rail system that does go to DFW Airport and will get you to the city center, but the AT&T Stadium is not in Dallas proper, of course. It's in Arlington, a separate city that is famous for having polar bears. No trains at all, none even get close. Just a reminder that this stadium is hosting the most matches at the World Cup, with 9, including one of the semifinals. But the icing on the cake for me is when you go to the stadium's website and go to directions, there is no mention of transit at all. So maybe I should have put Dallas last now that I think about it, but oh well. Number 14, Zapopan, Guadalajara, Estadio Akron. Now this one is a bit upsetting. Generally speaking, Mexican cities do have better transit than their American and Canadian counterparts. Mexico is a lot more football crazed than the US and Canada too. And they are the first country to host the Men's World Cup 3 times. But it's just a shame that their team right now is easily the worst of the 3 hosts. And when I first heard that Guadalajara was a host city, I was a bit hopeful, because their city does have a pretty solid urban rail system, and of course BRTs because Latin America. Though sadly, the stadium is a bit of a transit desert, not being anywhere near the rail or rapid bus network. It's only hosting 4 games, none of which are in the knockout rounds. But I mean, hey, at least there's no parking moats. Really? Come on. Number 13, Miami Hard Rock Stadium. Just about surviving relegation in this stadium league? I mean, why is there relegation? This is North America. They don't do relegation in MLS. What am I talking about? Anyway, back on topic, Miami has 7 games, including the greatest World Cup game, the 3rd place playoff. So what's the rail transit scene like? Once again, nothing in the vicinity. But of course, Miami has a good assortment of rail lines in the city. They have their people movers, they have one of the forgotten post-war metros, and of course the big X factor is Brightline. Though none of those rail lines get near the stadium, unfortunately. However, Brightline does operate shuttles between the stadium and Aventura Station on match days, which ironically means that if you want to get to the stadium and want to rely solely on transit, you might just be better off flying to Orlando instead if flights are cheaper. Number 12, Houston, NRG Stadium. Oh my god, it's an actual rail line. They did it! They built a rail link to the stadium. But to get there, you have to cross through all of this parking. Number 11, Inglewood, Los Angeles, SoFi Stadium. Now this one is definitely controversial, I'll say that. This is arguably the most modern stadium on our list, yet it almost didn't even make the cut, as there were disputes with the pitch size and the amount of hospitality seating. But it seems like it'll be good for now, with 8 matches scheduled here. But what about transit? Well, as you probably know by now, LA is building a lot of it. The LAX People Mover looks like it might just, for real this time, open in time for the World Cup, which is great news for all the international fans heading to Angel City. And the D-Line extension is coming along nicely too. Though that's where the positives end. The transit project most pertinent to the World Cup is the Inglewood People Mover, which will connect the K-Line's downtown Inglewood station to the stadium. But it looks like it won't just not open in time for the World Cup, but not even for the 2028 Olympics either, which is an even bigger event. And at that point, you start to wonder, is this project even worth it anymore? And maybe more time and money should be spent at other more pressing projects, like the Sepulveda line? By the way, please don't be a monorail. Please? Number 10, Santa Clara, San Francisco Bay Area, Levi's Stadium. Here we go, this is the big one. As a self-proclaimed Bay Area expert, citation needed, I was always going to have strong feelings about this one. VTA obviously isn't amazing, but they still provide regular light rail service to the stadium, with BART and Caltrain links on either end. And they do have experience running extra event trains that will be greatly useful for the 6 matches being held here. And of course, you get regional service from Amtrak if it decides to show up. The VTA light rail has gotten some bad press for how they've handled events recently, with some fans at Taylor Swift's Eras Tour getting out so late that they missed the last BART train of the night, even after BART extended service. I don't know if that says more about the inefficiencies of light rail at moving large crowds quickly, or just Swiftie culture. When you compound this with the walk along stroads and narrow sidewalks between the ground and the station, it's not great. But it's still good enough for the top 10, which I think says more about the things that came before it. Number 9, Mexico City, Estadio Azteca. When you think of the world's great football stadiums, you think of Wembley, Camp Nou, the Maracanã, and the Azteca definitely deserves to be up on that list. This is where Pelé and Maradona both lifted the World Cup. Maradona scored his 2 most famous goals, in the same game no less, and the high altitude has frequently stifled visiting teams. But sadly, one regard where the Azteca falls a little bit short is transit. CDMX, as we should be calling it, not Mexico City, is arguably the best transit city in Latin America, but the stadium only gets 1 light rail line and none of the other rail lines, or the BRTs that the city is famous for. All of that said, you can totally make a trip here and solely rely on transit, but expect a bit of frustration with the sheer number of services and transfers needed to get to the stadium and everything. Overall, a very solid mid-table inclusion. Number 8, Foxborough, Boston, Gillette Stadium. And now we're into the top half, with cities where if you're not at least considering taking the train to the game, what are you even doing? Gillette Stadium is scheduled to host 7 games at the World Cup, and it's very smoothly connected to the MBTA's commuter rail network via the Foxborough line, which for some reason is spelled differently to the actual city of Foxborough. If anyone knows why, please do let me know. On event days, the Providence line also stops here, though normally it just runs express. Boston's regional rail system is in a lot better shape than its urban rail, though the T is still great for getting around the city, and I hear it's getting better. If there's one thing that it falls short on though, it's gotta be a pretty weak connection to Logan Airport. At least the Silver Line exists now. Forgive the terrible analogy, but this entry is a lot like the Manchester United of our list, a former giant that's pretty rough around the edges now and needs some work. Number 7, Guadalupe, Monterrey, Estadio BBVA. Our final entry in Mexico and one of the newer stadiums on our list, though it's only getting 4 games. There was a bit of controversy around the construction of the stadium due to disrupting a wildlife preserve, which isn't great. Line 1 of the Metro Ray, what a great name by the way, terminates at Exposición. It's a line that runs every 5 minutes and I'm sure will be widely used. It seems promising at first, but unfortunately the station is pretty far away from the ground. It's over 1 kilometer and that's only at its northernmost point. That being said, with 2 new lines on top of the existing 3 opening by 2026, Monterrey is in very good hands. And yes, like any good city in this part of the world, Monterrey does have a BRT. Number 6. East Rutherford, New York, New Jersey, MetLife Stadium. I imagine many of you were eager to find out where I place MetLife. And for me, it just misses out on a Champions League spot. It's served by an event-exclusive branch of the New Jersey Transit regional rail system, which will get you to Secaucus Junction, one of the most important train stations in the entire Northeast region. You can connect from here to the Northeast Corridor line and tons of other NJT services, which includes a good connection to Newark Airport and New York City's Penn Station. Newark, of course, does handle plenty of international flights, which boosts its ranking on this list. But I imagine most people's home airlines will fly to JFK instead. And for that, all I can say is good luck. But the most important point, if you didn't know already, that MetLife is hosting the World Cup final. And 7 other games, of course, but all eyes will be on that final. Are there plans to improve transit service for such an auspicious event? Well, yes actually, as a busway project is being built to provide relief capacity for the trains from Secaucus Junction. It's not a lot, and it's unclear if it will be done in time, but they'd better hurry. And finally, parking moat heaven. Or maybe parking moat hell, I should say. Number 5, Toronto, BMO Field. This one was the hardest to rank on the entire list. If the entire world was the Americas, Toronto would be considered a world-class transit city. The subway is great, the regional rail is pretty extensive, and there's a lot of vision for the future. But what about the present? BMO Field, which will host 6 matches, is a stone's throw from Exhibition Station on the Lakeshore West GO line, which is one of the better GO lines. Currently, it runs half-hourly or better all day, and Exhibition itself is currently undergoing some expansion work. Sadly, it won't be done in time for the World Cup, but frequency should hopefully increase in time. And of course, the stadium will get a new metro line, the Ontario line, but not until the early 2030s. The stadium is also not terribly far from the massive hub of Union Station, with plenty of buses and streetcars linking the two. Maybe in 5 or 10 years' time it would trouble the top 4, but for now it just falls short. Also, Canada's opening match will be held here, and they just had an incredible Copa America, so unless something really weird happens between now and then, spirits will be very high. Number 4, Philadelphia Lincoln Financial Field. Our final Northeast Corridor city now, and Philly really does have some amazing transit. It's 6 games for the Lincoln Field, which sits at the southern end of the Broad Street subway, or I guess now the B line, following the SEPTA Metro rebranding. The station here has 4 tracks, which is in part due to it being a terminus station, but also to allow extra capacity for events, to send trains out quickly. It almost gets there for me, but there are 2 major issues. One is that the SEPTA airport line runs only half-hourly, which for an air rail link is terrible. Just terrible, all I can say. And also a pretty hefty walk distance between the station and the ground. The latter isn't strictly a bad thing, because a long walk can help in distributing the capacity of passengers evenly, rather than everyone arriving at the train station in one huge crunch. We don't want it to be too long, as that can cause accessibility issues. That all being said, I can imagine a World Cup visiting fan hopping up and down the Northeast Corridor to watch games across Boston, Philly, and New Jersey. It honestly sounds like a fever dream, something that I consider doing if I could maybe afford tickets to that many games. Number 3, Seattle, Lumen Field. Now these top 3 are all in a league of their own, starting with Lumen Field. Along with being upzoned quite a lot over the years, this is probably the best situated stadium on our entire list in terms of transit centrality. King Street, Seattle's regional and intercity rail terminal, is right there. It's also got 2 stops on the 1 line, the main crosstown light rail line that, yes, goes all the way to SeaTac Airport. This makes Seattle the only city on the entire list with a 1-seat ride from stadium to airport, which is pretty neat. The main thing holding it back, though, is capacity, as I do imagine Link will be stretched to its limits during the 6 games being held here. But you'd be silly not to take transit if you're watching a World Cup game in Seattle. Number 2, Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Seattle's loss was Atlanta's gain when they got the metro that Seattle should have gotten. The Mercedes is hosting 8 games, the joint second most of any venue, and includes a semi-final. The stadium itself is really unique architecturally, with great transit access being the cherry on top. MARTA is obviously far from perfect, but it's a high-capacity, heavy rail connection straight to the stadium, with trains running every 6 minutes across 2 lines, at a station that's clearly built for stadium capacity, with a second overflow station not too far away, brand new rolling stock arriving very soon, and good airport access. What's not to like here? For transit lovers, this is a dream come true. Well, there is one thing not to like, in that the airport MARTA station is only accessible from the domestic side of the airport, not the international side. But to be fair, almost all of ATL's traffic is domestic, and a visiting fan would probably arrive at some other US city then connect into Atlanta, so they'll end up on the domestic side anyway. So it's not really a deal breaker, but if we're being honest, Atlanta never held a candle to the city up next. First, Vancouver, BC Place. This was pretty obvious, wasn't it? No way was anyone gonna dethrone BC Place. If perfection is impossible, this might just be the closest that we'll get to it. The SkyTrain is just incredible. And best of all, much like Atlanta in truth, Vancouver has relatively recent experience with a major sporting event in the 2010 Olympic Games. Indeed, much of the SkyTrain that we know now was built for that purpose. The best light metro in North America without a doubt, though it doesn't have that much competition. Frequencies are amazing, coverage is strong, and there's literally no reason to drive if you're a traveling fan. With 7 matches here, it's the most for any non-US venue. A lock for top spot from the very beginning. So yeah, while there is some good in this list, and it's probably not as bad as it seems for some of the larger venues, it was quite a bummer to compile this. One of the stories from Euro 2024 in Germany was that fans were pretty frustrated with Deutsche Bahn, as it was quite a disaster with delays and everything as you'd expect, as friend of the channel Jamie covered very well in her video about Deutsche Bahn. So if they thought that was bad, then in 2026, they'll be in for quite a treat. Again, I don't want to be all negative because there is progress in some places, but driving will still be the preferred mode of travel for most visiting fans in 2026, which is not only going to add frustration, but make the whole experience cost more than it should. Oh well, at least the World Cup's not in Qatar this time. Oh, you're kidding me.